Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SBN History Channel. So glad you could be here with us today. So, checking out on the other side. Okay, sounds good. So, today we have a video that I have been really wanting to do, and so that is our president rankings. So, this will be a fun little video that I wanted to do. If you watch my main channel, I've done one before, but I think I'm going to do another ranking right here, right now, to be a little bit more accurate to what I'm thinking. Plus, I'm thinking that Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and Barack Obama, I may hold off on ranking them because of since it's so soon. Since Obama, especially, it may not be fair to rank him. So that's what I'm going to go with. Had to get a sip of my drink real quick. But turn the volume on my computer down a little bit. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive into the ranking. So as you can see, we're on the Tier Maker website where we're going to be doing our ranking. So this is going to be a whole lot of fun. Just watching on the other end, seeing how our stream's going. Okay. So first is George Washington. Of course, he was our first president, and I think he did a fantastic job with the way that he set up our government and the way that the executive branch should be held. So, George Washington, I'm going to put him in S tier because I think he deserves to be there. And I will say my computer is a little slow, so it may take it a little bit. There you go. George Washington, S tier. I think it's self-explanatory. He was the first man to be president of the United States of America, and he did a great job of establishing what it meant to be the man and to be the one to set up the executive branch and what it should look like. So I really do think that George Washington, definitely S tier president for sure. Alright, and then you got John Adams. It was tumultuous. He made some mistakes in who he chose for his cabinet, and some of his ideas and policies were not great, especially the Alien Sedition Acts, which, considering what the country had fought for freedom and independence, it didn't make a lot of sense to have a law like that. So it looks like I'm going to have to scroll down a little bit to find John Adams. But yeah, John Adams to me is, I would say, a C president. That's where I'm going to put him. I think C is fair for him. Like I said, it was tough because you're having to replace George Washington. And there's no replacing George Washington in all reality. So, it's very hard, but I think he did a fine job. Not incredible, though. I think C is pretty good for John Adams, if I'm going to be completely honest. I think that C, like I said, I think it makes a lot of sense for Adams because it was hard for him, for sure. Alright, let's move on to our next president, Thomas Jefferson. And personally speaking, I've always liked Thomas Jefferson. Of course, the Louisiana Purchase, he expanded the country with the Louisiana Purchase. So I think that he did some good things. He was a man that promoted, democracy and really, states' rights, which I am to give you an idea of where I align, I'm one that I believe that the states should have as much right to govern themselves as possible. I believe in not like a weak federal government, but like, not like this super powerful federal government that dictates everything throughout the country. I think that it's more so the states have more authority over their people that they govern than the federal government does. So that's where I stand on that. Thomas Jefferson was a good president, though, and I'm gonna set him in C just for the moment, just to scroll up. But I think Thomas Jefferson belongs in A tier. I don't know how many people would really disagree with me on that one. I think A tier for Thomas Jefferson. That's the right move. And like I'd said before, he did some good things for this country. And so, we're not going to look past that. I think that he was a good president. And so, A tier is where I'm going to have Thomas Jefferson. Alright. Next is James Madison. Of course, he took us into the War of 1812, and he tried to continue on a lot of the policies that the Democratic Republicans had established at that time. He was a good president. Not as good as Jefferson, but he was a good president. And so for that, I'm going to give him B tier. I think that that's fair for Madison. Because, his leadership throughout the War of 1812, he did a great job of leading us. And so, I'm going to put him in B tier. So, B tier is where James Madison will sit. And I will say this, I'm not going to have many put in S tier, and I'm not going to have many put in D tier, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, because I don't know if there really is many presidents that deserve to be in S or D tier, but there are some that's going to be there, and you're going to see here in just a little bit. So, next is James Monroe. He's the only man after George Washington to run unopposed in an election. And so, this is just because at this time the Federalist Party pretty much dissolved and there really wasn't much left for the Federalist Party. So, it was what they called the era of good feelings. James Monroe, he's a good president. I'm going to put him in B tier just like Madison because I feel like that's a fair ranking for James Monroe. So, well, wait a second. My computer tries to act crazy sometimes. But, here we go. To me, not much difference between Madison and Monroe. So, both of them B tier, I think, is fair. So, that's where they're going to sit. So, now we're on to John Quincy Adams. And much like his father, he wasn't able to do a whole lot with his presidency. I think there was just for one, he had a government working against him. So it was him against the rest of Congress, and so he couldn't get a lot of stuff passed through. For that, I mean, I think he aligns just like his father in C tier. I mean, it's not that they were bad presidents, it's that they just couldn't get it done. And so yeah, C tier for both Adams. And there's only been two sets of father and son to ever become president. You got John and John Quincy Adams, and then you have George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. That's the only two set of father and son that ever became president of the United States of America. So I thought that would be interesting information for you to have. Alright, we're on to Andrew Jackson. And in recent years, there's been a lot of debate about where we put Jackson. I personally think that he was a good president. But, of course, the Indian Removal Act definitely leaves a really bad stain on his presidency. What otherwise was a great presidency, the Indian Removal Act, today at least is really frowned upon that he had done that. So, as far as Andrew Jackson, I think I'm going to put him in A tier. I think that's a good place to put him because, personally speaking, I think he did a good job, but he wasn't perfect. And so, A tier is where I'm going to put him. And I know I'm probably going to get a lot of people disagree with me on that. But here's the thing. When ranking presidents, yes, it can be a very controversial thing to do. But in reality, if we take the time and just, realize this is just one person's list, that's the important thing. And so, we can disagree on things. We just don't need to be, really attacking people just for their opinions. That's the main thing here. So, Andrew Jackson, A tier, just like Thomas Jefferson is. And as you can see, George Washington, S tier. And I mean, I think you kind of understand probably who's going to be the other one in S tier. But we'll get to that here in just a little bit. Martin Van Buren is next, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you, he's C tier. And again, it's nothing against him. It's just that the stuff that he wanted to get done, he just wasn't able to do it, and there was just a lot of controversy at the time, and so he's going to sit in C tier as we wait on this. So there we go. Alright, next is William Henry Harrison, and to be fair, I'm going to... I think I'll probably make another... Well... We're going to say C tier is... I'm trying to think. Because I probably should have put this together better, but... I think I need to create another... yeah, here we go. Add a row below. Okay. And we're going to name this... no ranking. And I think that if we're going to, real quick, I think we're going to put William Henry Harrison and James Garfield into this. Really a fair argument to make about either one of them because they both died in office just after getting elected. So them two are going to sit in our no ranking because it's not really fair to rank them in that regard. And I mean, I guess you could say Zachary Taylor as well because he only served a year as president. So, yeah, we'll do William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor, and James Garfield will sit in the no ranking column because it's not fair to rank them when combined they served a total of 2 years as president. Not really a fair argument to be had. Alright, John Tyler, and I'm just going to say this right here. There's going to be a long list of presidents in a row that are not incredible. So, John Tyler, in my mind, he deserves to sit in C tier. And it's more so that he's one of the few presidents that went against his party, and it was a struggle. He's from Texas. And interesting note about John Tyler that you probably heard before, but after being president of the United States of America, he went back to Texas, and he was actually a senator in the Confederate States of America in their government. So, very interesting stuff here from John Tyler. So, he sits in C tier just because he was basically, it felt like a lame duck, just not, no one took him seriously because they didn't really know what to do, because that's the first time the president had been not assassinated, but had died in office, and so it was a difficult situation, and so John Tyler sits in C tier because of that. Alright, next is James Polk, and I will say this, he actually, what he promised, he pretty much kept his promises, and I've always liked Polk because of that. Now, of course, again, there's some controversy around him surrounding his treatment during the Mexican-American War. People say that he's an imperialist. Personally speaking, he stood on his promises and actually did it. One of very few presidents. So A tier is where Polk will lie for me because he did what he said he was going to do. And so I got to give him a lot of respect there. So James Polk, A tier, is where he will sit. Alright, so next, we're not doing Taylor because, he died in office. But we're going to do Millard Fillmore, and again, C tier is where I'll have him because, again, he didn't do a whole lot for the country. And so, I just think that, I just feel like that's the right placement for Millard Fillmore is C tier. Franklin Pierce, now we're getting into the really bad presidents here. Franklin Pierce is D tier. And because, first off, the Kansas-Nebraska Act is a really bad stain on his presidency because if you know what the Kansas-Nebraska Act, it basically helped continue segregation, and it was in slavery and all, that whole situation. But yeah, it helped continue a lot of bad things for this country, and so D tier is where I'm going to have him. Plus, from reports, he was just drunk all the time. He was never sober. His son died very horrifically right as he got elected president, and so he just drank himself silly during his presidency. So D tier is where he will sit. And then James Buchanan, again, just another bad president who really didn't care to address Civil War, and everybody knew it was imminent at that point when he was president, that it was coming, So, yeah, James Buchanan, D tier for sure. Alright, next, Abraham Lincoln, and I don't think it takes any rocket scientist to know he's an S tier. Because of his handling of the Civil War, he was the commander-in-chief that America needed at that time. Now, the reason why he's behind George Washington, in my mind, which, I mean, I'm not really ranking them in, I'm not putting them in the order of how I would, I'm just putting them in the order of where they served. The reason why I still have Washington over Lincoln is because Washington, in my mind, his policies were pretty much good, and he would set up the government, and you gotta give credit where credit's due on that. Lincoln, on the other hand, there were some things which I know during a time of war, there's a lot that has to be done, but there's some things that he did that I feel like was kind of an overreach by the commander-in-chief, and so, for that, I think that, yes, he's S tier, but he deserves to be behind Washington. Andrew Johnson, D tier. He tried to set the country back after the Civil War, because Lincoln gets assassinated, Andrew Johnson has to become president, and he tried to set the country back a long way. He was not a good president, and he didn't do any favors for this country, so yeah, he will sit right there in the D tier. Alright, Ulysses Grant. I think he did a lot of good things for the country. Personally speaking, though, I feel like he fits in the C tier because of corruption in government that had come upon him. There was a lot, especially the Republicans, the spoils system, it was bad. It was really bad. And so, Grant, he took the hit on that, and so, C tier is where Ulysses Grant will sit. Alright, Rutherford B. Hayes. Again, another C tier president. I mean, he didn't do much for the country. And, again, the country was, is Republican after Republican that was getting elected. And the South was getting really upset at this point because it felt like their voice still wasn't being heard because it felt like there was a lot of suppression, which I think there was, because there was a lot of people down south that it was getting monitored really heavily about who was voting and the way it was voted. So yeah, Rutherford Hayes was the president. And I think this was one of the most highly contested elections of all time. And there was a lot of claims of fraud in this, so made for a very interesting situation here. Alright. We got Chester Arthur. He ascended to the presidency after James Garfield was killed. Honestly, for the short time Arthur was president, I think he did a good job. I'm going to put him in B tier. I think that he's someone that he had his own issues before becoming president. And so, I got to give him credit for what he did for the country. I think he did a good job. And so, B tier is where I'm going to have him. He is only the third man I have in B tier, which is crazy. Alright. Grover Cleveland's first term. I think it deserves, actually, Grover Cleveland in general, I think, honestly, A tier. He was a conservative, and, I think he did a great job for this country, considering what he had to deal with, and after he got in the second time, Benjamin Franklin, I think it was a lot of Benjamin Franklin's doing, and, well, not just that, but the way that Congress, some of the bills passed during Benjamin Harrison's presidency in between Grover Cleveland, that hurt Cleveland's second term, and the scandal about Cleveland's wife and all that, it was kind of messy, and so yeah, Cleveland's second term not as good as his first, but his first definitely was really good. So I think that Grover Cleveland, I'm going to put him in A tier. I think he was a good president. Benjamin Harrison will go in C tier. Again, decent president, not incredible though. So yeah, I think C tier is where Benjamin Harrison should be ranked. And so we are 24 presidents down. We're halfway there, folks. Well, we're past halfway because we're not doing Obama, Trump, or Biden. So, take that as you may. Alright, William McKinley. I think he's an A-tier president. I think he did a lot of great things. And it is sad that he did get assassinated when he did. Which, if you want to hear something that's really crazy. Okay. I believe Robert Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's son. So, of course, Abraham Lincoln dies because he gets shot by John Wilkes Booth. I believe they said he was in the train station where James Garfield got shot. He was in Buffalo, New York when William McKinley got shot. And then he said he would never be around a president ever again. He was in San Francisco when Warren Harding died. So take that for what you may. Crazy situation. Imagine that you were in the same place as all these presidents died. I mean, it's a little weird to think about, but it's interesting history to note. Theodore Roosevelt, often regarded as one of our greatest presidents. I think he's an A-tier president. I just don't see anyone really being up in S-tier with Washington and Lincoln. And Roosevelt definitely for sure was a really good president. He did a lot of great things for us. He was the one who commissioned to get the Panama Canal built, which I don't understand why Jimmy Carter gave it up, but that's for another video another day. But Roosevelt, he did a lot of great things for the environment. He was a progressive, and he had a lot of progressive reforms. He did a lot of great things for this country. Now, some things politically I don't really agree with him on, but I think that he was a really good president, and I think America kind of agrees. Theodore Roosevelt was a good president who did a lot of great things for this country. So, A tier for Theodore Roosevelt. William Howard Taft, I always liked him. I think that his philosophy did not fit the Republican Party of the time. I feel like if you would have gone, it would have had to have been either like 60 years in the past or 60 years in the future from where he was to really fit in with the Republican Party, because his politics, especially after Roosevelt, the Republican Party definitely became split after Taft's presidency, but especially after Roosevelt, it was more of a progressive party, wanting to enact a lot of progressive reforms and that kind of thing. And so, I think that Taft, I think he's a B-tier president. He was good, but I feel like there were just some things that, because of the Republican Party, it kind of held him back. And so, B-tier is where I have Taft. I think that's a fair ranking for him. I don't know why my computer keeps doing this. There we go. But B-tier for William Howard Taft. Alright, we got Woodrow Wilson, and I'm going to tell you this right now. Definitely D-tier. He was not a good president. He's one of the worst presidents that we have ever reelected in this country. And the main thing was, for his reelection, his slogan was, "We're not going to war. We're not going to World War I." Well, he gets us right in there. Literally, it felt like the moment he gets back in the White House, he's got us in the war. Another thing, he aired a pro Ku Klux Klan movie in the White House. So, if there's no other thing that you take away from this, he definitely showed his true colors of what he was like. And then also, keep this in mind too, that, and I'm not trying to say this is a bad thing, but he, near the end of his presidency, he got really sick, and he would be in his bedroom. And so, what would happen, his wife would get the bill that was to be signed and go in the room and shut the door. Speculation has it that technically he wasn't running the country, it was his wife running the country. So, I mean, I could go on and on about Woodrow Wilson. He's not a good president. He's one of our worst presidents in the history of this country. And really, a lot of his policies have set us back a long way, and we still are reeling from some of his policies. That is how much of an impact Woodrow Wilson had as a president, and not in a good way. And so, and I mean, most people, I think, pretty much agree Woodrow Wilson was not a good president. So, D tier is where Wilson should be. Warren Harding, D tier. Or actually C. I'll give him C.